Welcome back. President Trump set to deliver a major address to the nation tonight, more than a month into the U.S. operation in Iran. The White House says he's going to detail the mission, its success, the next steps. Let's bring in senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy for a preview. Tell us everything the president's going to say, Peter.
Jillian, the latest numbers that we've got, 12,300 Iranian targets struck, 155 Iranian vessels destroyed. And so it sounds like the Pentagon is pretty close to the end of their target list.
Well, I mean, there's not much left, quite frankly, to bomb in Iran. You know, the military has been quite effective and efficient of demonstrating our capabilities.
And we know a lot about President Trump's remarks tonight. The White House tells us this. President Trump is going to give an operational update on the progress of Operation Epic Fury. He will highlight the United States military's success in achieving its stated goals prior to the operation, which were destroy Iran's deadly ballistic missiles and production facilities, annihilate their navy, ensure their terrorist proxies can never destabilize the region again, guarantee that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon, and he is going to reiterate the 2 to 3 week timetable for concluding the operation. President Trump is also strongly hinting in multiple interviews that he's thinking about pulling the U.S. out of NATO. He would need a 2/3 Senate vote or an act of Congress to officially do that. NATO allies, though, so far appear unmoved.
This is not our war. We will not be drawn into the conflict. That is not in our national interest. And the most effective way we can support the cost of living in Britain is to push for de-escalation in the Middle East and a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
The president of Finland said that he talked to President Trump on the phone today and that NATO came up. They had a productive chat, but it sounds like President Trump really, really wants the U.S. pulled out, however it is that he can figure that out. Jillian.
Certainly does. Peter Doocy on the North Lawn for us. Thank you. Let's go ahead and bring in our panel now. We have Marc Thiessen, a Fox News contributor, and Meghan Hayes, former director of message planning under President Biden. Marc, what do you want to hear the president say tonight?
I think it's great that he's giving this speech. He's giving an operational update to the American people about the operation. I think a lot of misinformation is being spread about what's happening on the ground, and this has been one of the most successful military operations in the history of the United States military. Indeed, this is possibly the most successful air campaign that's ever been done in human history.
As measured, like, by targets?
As measured by the sheer demonstration of military air power decimating an enemy. I mean, you know, we've got the Israelis have had like 14,000 targets. We've probably had as many, and we've taken very small number of casualties. They've been unable to respond, and we are eliminating a threat. Iran will not be able to threaten the world with a nuclear weapon or the ballistic missiles to deliver them. And that's the world is going to be much better off at the end of this. I think all the people who are playing this down are going to have a lot of egg in their face in a few weeks.
Are you one of those people?
I have a little bit of a different stance. I think it's about time that the president addresses the American people and lays out the goals and what the entire purpose of this operation is. I don't disagree that it's not successful. I would just like to know why we're doing it, why now, and what the end goal is, and how do we get out of this? Because the Strait of Hormuz not being open is really deeply impacting the people in the United States and around the world with the economy and prices being so high, and no one's addressing the affordability crisis here in the States. And I think that's a huge problem for the president. The foreign policy here may be successful, but it is really damaging. It's becoming a domestic problem for him.
You know, it's interesting, Marc, the point about, you know, military operations always have you know, nothing comes free. Nothing worth having is done easily. There are always, I don't know if you want to call the gas prices an unforeseen consequence or not, but there is always a downside. It is a question politically of how long the American people are willing to pay the price. Yeah,
you know what? I think back to some of the campaigns that we've launched, the Battle of Iwo Jima, D-Day, things like that, about the price that we paid for wars. I mean, if we as a country cannot accept 4 to 6 weeks of high gas prices in order to eliminate the nuclear threat to the world, then we are no longer a superpower. I mean, the cost of this is minuscule when compared to the benefits of it. And quite frankly, one of the things that I'm shocked about that's been different about this, in addition to just the sheer excellence of our military operation, is how many people are talking about this like it's a disaster. If you look at the covers of the last 3 covers of The Economist. It's like, people are it's almost like they're cheering for defeat. They're cheering for failure. And it is in everybody, whether you like President Trump, dislike President Trump, whether you agree with the decision to go to war, we should all be rallying around the troops when they're in combat, and we should be rooting for them to succeed. And if it's a success, then we should praise him for it. And if it's not, then he obviously will pay the consequences of that. But it's going to be a success.
Some of the people who are definitely not willing to pay any of the costs involved in this are the Europeans. We heard Keir Starmer there in Peter Doocy's report. We also heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio last night. Take a quick listen. Want to get your reaction.
The NATO is a one-way street. The NATO is simply about us having troops in Europe to defend Europe. But when we need their help, not their help, we're not asking them to conduct airstrikes. When we need them to allow us to use their military bases, their answer is no. Then why are we in NATO?
Can you answer?
I think that the Europeans have a great question here, but why did they do this? Why is the United States doing this right now? And I think you need to brief NATO. You need to brief the European countries to get their support. That's normally what happens here.
You mean on the front end?
On the front end. You don't just go at something and expect them to then suffer the consequences. They are also suffering the consequences with higher prices and higher gas prices and goods not being able to move. So I think that they would like some respect shown to them as well of, why are we doing this right now? We're happy to help, but we just want to know what the end game is. What is the goal? A couple of months ago, Trump said he obliterated the nuclear weapon. So now why are we doing this again? I just think, it's really interesting that you can tell people that this is consequences that they need to pay so we don't have a nuclear weapon. But I think that's a hard thing to say to 65% of the population who is saying they are suffering for higher gas prices when they can't afford food on their table and can't afford gas to go to work. I just think it's a hard place to be put in.
The Europeans weren't saying, if you just brief us, we'll help you. That's not what they were saying, and they were briefed. They understand what the objectives of the campaign are, and they were. By the way, these are the same people who were just telling Donald Trump, you don't need to have sovereignty over bases in Greenland because you can just they're a NATO ally. They'll let you use them. And then a few weeks later, Spain, Italy, Britain not letting us use their base, not letting us fly over their airspace. They're making Donald Trump's point on Greenland. Donald Trump didn't ask British pilots to fly alongside U.S. pilots and bomb the Iranian nuclear program. He just said, let us use your bases. Let us have overflight. And Spain is denying us overflight. Italy just told us we can't use their bases. What is the point of having U.S. bases? I would not be surprised if Donald Trump takes a real hard look at why we have bases in Europe to begin with after this.
I just think this is what happens when you're so disrespectful to different countries. You go to different events in different countries, and you're just like, we don't need you. America's going to go it alone. Why would you now expect them to help you?
I just think we don't need you. America's not going alone. He's asking them to help with the Strait of Hormuz, which they benefit from more than we do because they need the Strait of Hormuz. We don't.
I totally hear you, but for the past year, that's all the administration has been saying to the European countries is we don't need you, and being so disrespectful with tariffs and insulting them. I just think that it's coming home to roost.
When Donald Trump came into office in 2016, only 3 NATO allies were meeting their 2% commitment to GDP. It's only through tough love and through badgering them that he's gotten them to commit to 5. But what's the point of 5 if they're not even willing to help us when we need them?
If it's not a military alliance, really, then
what's the point?
What is it? That's the question I guess the Secretary of State is asking now. A lot of folks in the administration. Great conversation. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.